Hello, everyone. Jeff and Zeon here are going to look at Vladimir Putin's chart. I guess we'll start off with the Gemini moon if you want. That kind of interests me. I don't know. We're taking this with a grain of salt, birth time wise, because it does say his birth time accuracy is poor. But it is interesting that he has a eighth house moon in Gemini, like I do, and Jenna Ortega. I kind of suspect that he's an INTJ.
Yeah. So, all right. So, what do you think this signifies, Jeff?
I'm sure it signifies a lot about my moon that he just kind of rationalizes his emotions.
Yeah. Well, if Gemini, because Gemini tends to be thought oriented and it tends to be kind of separated from its real inner thoughts and feelings based on what it needs to superficially project outside itself all the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's conversation oriented. So, when you have a moon in Gemini, it tends to be in some cases, it's like the emotions are at the surface, and then in a lot of other cases, the emotions are kind of hidden. Um, and since it's in the eighth house, which is the house of like secrets and mysteries, that's going to be even more intense. But it's also a very emotionally analytical position because Gemini and the eighth house together are fairly, I would say, intellectually analytical. So he has an emotional need to understand everything and everyone around him in terms of like all the hidden meanings and potentialities that they might represent.
All right, and I see that it's square with his or trine no square right 120 degrees with his ascendant, and it's Scorpio ascendant like me too.
Let's see. What is that? End of Taurus, start of Scorpio. I don't think that's not a trine.
So what, 30, 60, 90, 120 degrees. That
100. That should be because 120 is same element signs.
oh, but
That
it's right on a cusp. That's an Earth sign, huh? It's pointing right to the ascendant. Maybe it's pointing to Mercury.
120 would be at the start of Libra, which would be right here, and then another 30-ish degrees is 150, and that's a
Oh, so it's
quincunx.
quincunx. Okay, maybe that's what that yellow is.
Yeah, it must be a quincunx. So if it's a quincunx to the ascendant, I mean, well, we could get into the weeds talking about a lot of these like more minor aspects, but do you want to yet? Because there's plenty of other bigger things that we might want to discuss first.
Sure, we'll see how it goes
All
and
right.
how much time we have left, I guess.
All right, so let's see, Moon Quincunx Ascendant. All right, so the way that he acts and the way that he feels, his outward behavior and his emotional drives are not always in sync, but they have enough overlapping similarities that they will kind of push and pull on each other. Quincunxes are a little bit hard to understand, but basically it's like a really big overlap that drives both things forward really heavily because they're dissimilar yet also have this overlapping feature. So it's like, and the ascendant, the first house, is obviously just your sort of native behavior and like how you act all the time. Since it's in Scorpio, um, he, I mean, his chart, it's ridiculous, really. When we get to the nodes, you'll see why it's even more ridiculous. But Scorpio ascendant is obviously secretive behavior. He was in the KGB. Like he tends to be a political power player, right? He tends to use stratagems and everything that he does. It's just like a natural feature of who he is. It just comes to him.
Mm-hmm.
Um, with the moon being in Gemini in the eighth house, I mean that theme is intensified. But the fact that it's a quincunx relationship means that there's a sort of disconnect between the two positions, even though they both use strategy constantly. Sometimes he may not always be super aware of what he's feeling in terms of like what he wants to strategically implement versus how that's actually happening in reality with his behavior. But nonetheless, the two drive each other really strongly.
So, well, quincunx, is that like a positive or negative aspect? I know it's kind of like ambivalent, but
I don't really assign positive or negative to any of these. I say
yeah,
they can do something and do something smart with it, or don't do something smart with it, right?
yeah.
So
I don't see exactly where his moon is. I guess I should have tried pulling him up on astro chart or his sun. I don't know if it's right there near the Libra Virgo cusp, or is
yeah,
it?
look at the hash marks once again with this.
Yeah, so it's like near Saturn.
Yeah, so they're
It's
all
probably
grouped up.
conjunct with Saturn, huh?
Yeah. Well, it looks like okay. So we've got this right here. These two are Neptune and Mercury, and then it looks like the Sun and Saturn are these two.
Okay.
So, yeah, and that's definitely close enough to be a conjunction, if not
Yes.
also a conjunction with Neptune and even Mercury. So
Yeah, big stellium there.
that's fairly intense. When the Sun's conjunct Saturn, you've got a character who is very hard bitten and who has had the living crap kicked out of them, especially early on in life. They learn to be, I wouldn't say they always learn to be ruthless, but they can. They learn to be very practical and realistic about how they view themselves and other people. And even though it makes their lives harder early on, it also makes them wiser as time goes by, at least in terms of how they operate at an egotistical level. So, like, he can contain and control his ego. You see, he can restrain
Mm-hmm.
himself when he needs to accomplish something that he thinks is important, and he can feed his ego energy, so to speak, into his goals. Um, and the fact that it's on the cusp of the 12th house in Libra, all that stuff is going to be expressed more or less in a sort of like rational comparative mindset, but within the realm of, well, within the realm of possibly spirituality. The 12th house can also mean making sacrifices.
Yeah.
It can also just be very unconscious. So, like, he may not always, he may feel like he lost his sense of self. I mean, the Sun and Saturn together is already hard to deal with, but if we're saying that the Sun is going over the cusp into the 12th house with that Saturn, it's going over the edge into outer space, and like it's just lost to him. He may have felt like he never had a sense of self and that it was stripped away from him or sort of stolen even.
Yeah, I was watching that Nicholas Cruz. I think he did the Parkland shooting, and he did admire Putin, and he said that Putin had a really hard upbringing. I don't know much about his biography, but
He did, yeah. I know that he grew up like in the slums somewhere. What city was that he grew up in? But he was
uh,
really poor.
yeah, St. Petersburg, I think it said.
Yeah, he was really hard scrabble. Yeah, that's right, St. Petersburg. And I guess he had to have a lot of like street smarts to get by, and he had a lot of challenges. I don't remember what happened to his parents. I think he only had one of them, though. I'm not sure.
Interesting. So you said he's real secretive and stuff, and KGB. What else indicates something like KGB?
Oh, well, that's what I was going to get into with the nodes. So we have right here, this right over here is interesting. So the north node is right before fourth house there. That means the south node is like, what, right about there.
Yeah, conjunct with Pluto. That sounds kind of
Yeah,
nasty.
it is. It is. And this is even more ridiculous. Get this. So the south node is right next to the cusp of the 10th house, and it's in Leo. And what is Leo? Leo is the sign of the autocrat or the monarch or the ruler, and the 10th house is the house of being like the person with the high public status and being like the professional controller over organizations and things. And then Pluto's right on top of that, and Pluto is your drive towards secrecy and power mongering. And the
Hmm.
south node is right next to it, which means that his natural tendency is to engage in all those things in a negative sense as much as he can without
Uh,
even thinking about it.
Kind of like my Mars is conjunct with my South node and opposed to my North node,
Hmm.
just in different house, different theme.
Yeah, which could potentially make you explosively angry and individualistic without necessarily trying to be.
Yeah.
Um, you know, and when you get angry or when you're individualistic in your case, it's like it's encouraging kind of your bad tendencies and trying to yank you back from internally maturing. Well, that's kind of what his Pluto's doing here. And the fact that it's Leo 10th house, I mean, this is actually literally sort of a Hitler-esque nodal position, because Hitler had something similar, and I think he had both Leo and Capricorn with like the ruler of his south node, something like that. I think it was Capricorn south node and Leo was like the north node or the south node ruler. So his ruler in this case obviously is the Sun for the south node and Pluto here up at the top, and so
Yeah.
that would once again be the Sun Saturn thing over here in Libra. That's looks like it's jumping the border into the 12th house, which means that once again, it's like his worst tendencies often were being expressed through the brutality that he encountered and the sense of personal loss and loss of even his self and his own life that he encountered throughout all of his experiences. But as tragic as that may have sometimes been, it was also maybe maybe kind of feeding megalomania a little bit. Maybe it was like And I think that he might also take that harshness out on the rest of the world, to a sort of grievous extent because of that, when he's not learned his lessons in life, when he's not being more careful about what's truly correct and what isn't.
And look at that, it's all square to his. Oh no, it's sextile to his moon, and it's
Yeah.
and pretty much his Saturn too, and Neptune.
Yeah, it's a really weak. No, it's not sextile. That would be almost a trine to his moon, but it's a really weak one.
60 degrees of the trine. Oh, his north node's at 60 degrees. Yeah.
Yeah. This line right here between the moon and Libra. That's not, because it would have to be like at the very start of Libra right here. But
I mean, I'm talking about the Pluto right here. Where's my cursor? There it is. It right here and right here. That's not a sextile.
let me see. Middle to late Leo, early Gemini. No.
That's not 30, 60.
60
30.
degrees would be about there.
Oh, because the houses are in even. Huh?
Yeah, correct. You got to go by the signs, because the signs are the ones that are always even.
Okay.
Yep. So sometimes the houses get a little funky with these aspects because they're not even in the Ptolemaic system. I mean, you could do even houses, equal houses system if you want. Some people swear by that, other people swear by this, so it just depends. I don't know about that. A lot of really prominent people still use it, so
Okay.
it hasn't gone out of style for however many hundreds or thousands of years. So, but anyway, so what else do we want to look at here? We want to look at his north node.
Yeah. So he's definitely not striving towards that. It looks like.
Well, okay, so like since the nodes are points, like I forgot to kind of mention, the south node over here is probably actually in the 9th house. It's just that being conjunct Pluto in the 10th house is like a really gigantic thing.
Yeah.
The north node, so therefore the north node is going to be in the 3rd house thing, because it's just a point. It's not a planet that's up in the sky that takes up any space. So like it has to be really, really close to this cusp here for me to consider it like jumping over it. So we're going to say it's in the 3rd house with this. We don't have a super accurate birth time, but let's just say it is. So what does that mean? North node in Aquarius in the 3rd house. What do you think it means? Okay, and then okay, so yeah, I mean you got some of it in there. So Aquarius 3rd house north node. You're trying to learn to be hyper rational and intelligent, and you're trying to learn to be more pro-social. Aquarius is a humanitarian sign. It's the humanitarian sign. And it's the thing that's concerned with trying to create political revolutions for the good and benefit of humanity. And since it's the North Node, we're going to take a positive interpretation of that. It's not just like a destructive rebel. It's an innovator. It's a political progressive. It wants to create a brighter future for everyone. Usually, within its own cultural context, possibly for the entire world. It just depends. And being in the 3rd house, that is a little bit more, it's indicative that like he needs to stop being stuck on his own way of doing things in the 9th house, that south node, his own principles, his own sense of what's right and wrong, what's best in life and what isn't, and actually be more open to options and possibilities that are being presented by situations and people around him. So it's a more open-minded position with the north node. It's a lot more intellectual, and it should be humanitarian. Instead of starting wars and destroying things and conquering territory, he should be trying to push the human condition forward, and he should be trying to do that by being open to other possibilities rather than just what he probably thinks is correct.
It doesn't sound like that's what he's doing, really, right?
It doesn't, although there is a sort of question mark here. So let's look at the ruler of Aquarius, which is Uranus, which is over here in Cancer, also in the 9th house. Which is interesting because the south node is in the 9th house as well. So the Uranus ruler being in Cancer means that the way that he's going to express this humanitarian impulse when he's actually on track with his life and when he's developing in the right direction, Cancer is about home and family and homeland. So it's not necessarily going to be a globe-spanning humanitarianism that he's expressing. He is fighting for the Russian people and nobody else. This is... And it's going to be, because the 9th house is kind of like the morality and opinions that you hold dear, it's going to be a homeland and home culture based version of what do I think is correct in life? What do I think is right and wrong? What do I think is best to aim for? And it's all going to be driven by his home culture, which is Russia. And what do the Russians usually think about expansionistic narratives, right?
Yeah, they're pretty a conquering people.
Yeah, and they themselves, I mean, in some ways, Putin mirrors what happened in Russian history. I mean, Russia was a brutal place. Its history is very, very dark and violent. And the reason that Russia exists as a country is because they overthrew their Mongol oppressors and killed them all, and then fought tooth and nail to retain their independence through all kinds of horrible circumstances. There were rebellions, there were wars, there were famines, diseases, revolutions. Things collapsed constantly because the country's having such a hard time holding itself together. It was a very brutal and awful place. The winters are also nasty. So, since this North Node ruler, Uranus in Cancer, is also in the ninth house, you know what the ninth house also is? Expansionistic activities.
Mm.
So I kind of wonder if he thinks he's doing the right thing by doing all this. I mean, he seems to. And he thinks that he's serving the Russian people's interests. Maybe he is on track in a sense. This is the problem, though. We don't. So, like, his South Node and his North Node ruler are both in the ninth house. So there's kind of a split narrative as to, like, what's morally right and wrong with this guy. On the more positive end, if he really is defending his people's values and their interests and everything, then probably it's going in the right direction. But we don't know if that's always what he's doing, because the South Node could also be trying to hammer home its own sense of right and wrong as well, regardless. And that comes more from an egotistical position over here in Leo.
And that looks, I know it's a minor aspect, but you have Pluto there mucking things up, and it looks like it's almost semi-sextile with Uranus, too.
It is. It is effectively semi-sextile, which means a minor conflict. And so that minor conflict might also be driving a wedge even further between those two things in terms of what he thinks is right and wrong, and in terms of how he thinks his homeland needs to expand or not expand, and what's correct for them to be doing. Actually, really interesting to think about, because that's exactly what we see what he's been doing in the world. And this is, once again, why the nodes are always so interesting and enlightening.
Yeah, so he has like Saturn jamming his foot down the sun's throat, and Pluto's kind of like hindering the south node and the north node. So he kind of has a lot going against him, looks like.
Yeah, another interesting thing. I mean, you can see this big bright red thing here. Let's see if I can get a better marker. Gigantic aspect here is a square between that Sun and Saturn and Neptune and possibly Mercury complex that's over here in Libra, and then that North Node ruler. And it's like, well, what do you think is going to happen when a really sort of like hard-bitten ego is clashing so strongly with the sort of humanitarian homeland, like carrying aims of his North Node ruler, right? So sometimes his sense of brutality is going to win out over his sense of doing what's correct for his people, or trying to advance the human condition.
So what do you think are his intentions? Do you think he's actually, you think he is trying to serve the Russians, and think he's trying to do the right thing?
I think he thinks he is. I don't
Yeah.
know if he's always succeeding at it, and he probably doesn't either. He probably thinks he's doing it, but that doesn't mean he always is. And
Do you
if
think
he's
Pluto being there in the south node, do you think that's kind of like a huge blind spot for him, like a big blinder?
No, usually the blind spot is more along the lines of the North Node and anything that accompanies that.
But it's opposing the north node too, right?
Correct. So actually, things that are close to the South Node like that are things you're going to be really hyper aware of, and probably have very overdeveloped and often going in a negative direction.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's Pluto, then his need for secrecy, his need for spying, his need for power, control, dominance, like all those things are going to be really highly emphasized. And that's probably how he climbed the ladder out of poverty when he started out in life. I mean, yeah, he got his son got the crap kicked out of it by Saturn, but the Pluto was so strong and so overbearing and domineering that it probably helped him strategize his way to the top. Probably one. I don't know how many people he backstabbed. I don't really actually know everything that happened with him in the KGB, but being in the KGB itself is a giant red flag with this Pluto right next to the South Node, because Pluto basically is the planet of spying and intelligence in terms of like being analytical and trying to engage in espionage. So
It's interesting because I don't know if his houses are right because we don't know the birth time of him, but my Pluto's right on my ascendant in Scorpio, and his is kind of on the midheaven in Leo. Do you think that's kind of like showing more as an external thing since it's on Leo?
Yeah. So like when a planet, especially when it's on the cusp of the midheaven, which is also the 10th house, by the way, same thing.
Yeah.
But whenever a planet's in the 10th house or like the 7th house or the first house, these are things that usually make it show up very obviously and more publicly. But the 10th house is the most public one because the 10th house has to do with your external and public life, and also your career and things like that. So like if Pluto is showing up there, he will appear to be a very power mongering and controlling person. Not necessarily always in a bad way, but probably often. you know? And here's another interesting thing. So like maybe he actually has a lot of good reasons for what he's doing sometimes, maybe not this time with the Ukraine, but maybe he does sometimes. What will happen is everyone will see that Pluto and automatically assume he's up to no good. And then over the course of his life, he's going to just say, well, you know what? Since everyone always thinks that about me, I'm just going to do it anyway because like I can't convince them that I'm not like that. So sometimes that Pluto will show up in the 10th house and everyone will think that they're seeing it all the time. And it may not actually be what he's doing. So it's tricky.
Yeah, it's kind of like an INTJ thing. Well, if they think I'm the bad guy, well, I might as well be the bad guy.
Yeah. ENTJs get that too. So
It's interesting he has Mars in Sagittarius and possibly in the second house too. That's where I have my Mars, and he does judo, and I used to do judo, and I was reading like that could be like a sign of like you want to do like martial arts and stuff too, like that in that particular house sign combination with Mars.
really?
Yeah,
I mean, I can kind of see it because, like, the second house has to do with your body and how you deal with the physical world in a more immediate sense. And if you channel your Mars into the second house, that means that you kind of turn your body into a weapon.
yeah.
Now, if it's in Sagittarius, then you either take on a foreign approach to doing that, or you try to take a more sort of enlightened approach to it. It might indicate just becoming really, really strong and like powerful physically, but it might also indicate trying to take on a sort of philosophically enlightened way of turning your body into a weapon. So judo is a great way to do that, of course, right? Because it's like not only is it a foreign concept that you can explore the richness of, but it's also something that allows you to turn your opponent's power against them, which is a very direct way of trying to conquer things.
Yeah, it's interesting you said a foreign way of doing that too, because it's a Japanese martial art, and they brought judo to Russia, and Stalin basically renamed it sambo and added some like catch wrestling and stuff to it. He's not
Yeah.
embracing sambo; he's embracing judo.
Oh, that's interesting. Specifically, not the Russian version, huh?
Yeah, but
Yeah,
judo's
no.
an Olympic sport too, so maybe that's why too.
I mean, Sagittarius is always concerned with trying to learn as much as it can from a very different and vibrant viewpoint, and that usually means whatever is really foreign to you. So, like, if this was somebody who was from Japan, for instance, that we were looking at a chart for, we'd say, oh, well, maybe they were really interested in learning, like, some kind of weird medieval European fighting style or something. So,
Yeah, so it's just kind of like, oh, I got to be different. I can't go by the social norm of using sambo.
yeah, it's gotta be a high-minded sort of purity from the original place too. So like I'm gonna take the original foreign version of this and really get the essence out of it. I'm not gonna take some adulterated version. And then it gets channeled so that Mars aggression gets channeled through that mindset into the second house, which is the body. But the second house can also represent your resources, your finances, your money, your survival. It can represent your sense of beauty. It can represent the things you're trying to build. So it just kind of depends on how we want to interpret that. But
Issues, and like 2 or 3 months later, here we are. So we left off the Jupiter and Taurus in the seventh house. I guess we can talk about that. It looks like he kind of finds prosperity in his own personal comfort through money, through financial gains.
if you want to consider Jupiter to be prosperity, which to some extent it is,
Yeah,
Jupiter's kind of like the planet of plenty, but it could be plenty bad too in some cases. So it kind of depends.
yeah. I don't think it's very good in our charts. It doesn't seem.
Oh, mine, it's great, man. I love it. Um, yeah, no. So what do we want to talk about in terms of his Jupiter? There's a lot of aspects here.
So a lot of it's in the seventh house. So that's like the house of marriage, isn't it? Like a spouse.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah, relationships. Let's say. Let's say that.
I wonder how that affects him, especially him being pretty much. I think he's an INTJ, and I don't know if I never hear anything about his wife or if he's married or anything like that or his friendships. That thing that blew up with what were they called? That little sect that tried to do a coup.
Oh yeah, and then the guy got killed recently, didn't he?
Yeah, yeah.
Like
I
plane
forgot.
crash or whatever.
I don't keep up too much with it, but under how that, I mean, it's aspected. The red we decided was a square. That's squaring Pluto and the
Uh-huh.
south and the nodes. So that's
Uh-huh.
probably something that's going to like be a thorn in his side when he's trying to do his dictatorship stuff, huh?
Sort of. So if something is square to the nodes, then it has to do with like a sort of skipped developmental step in the person's life story or their greater spiritual conception or whatever you want to call it. So like if it's Jupiter, then he has not successfully integrated his ability to expand his horizons and viewpoints to get a different perspective on life in order to learn things when he needs to. So he might be a little bit closed minded about how he's operating sometimes. Like we've already gone over how this midheaven, the MC and Pluto, and also the South Node happens to be right there. It's just not on the chart. Like all that stuff being right there makes him probably very secretive and paranoid, and makes him very likely to use like espionage tactics to get what he wants in a very public way and in a very dictatorial way because it's Leo and the 10th house, which is like Leo is a very sort of like authoritative sign, and the 10th house has to do with how you operate in public and how you structure organizations or maybe the government if you're involved in it, right? So, South Node with Pluto, they're pretty much like it's pretty much a caricature almost, actually, of like how we see Putin in the West. Kind of this former KGB guy who's sort of almost darkly demonic and evil, and definitely a dictator. So if that Jupiter is squaring all that mess, then something that's stopping him from developing his North Node ability to understand more humanitarian concerns and a more communal approach to life and trying to sort of be more intellectual and free thinking is the idea that he can't change perspectives because Jupiter is all
Mm.
about switching your perspective and being able to see things from a very different side.
Interesting too. My Jupiter is down here in Cap in the third house, and it's kind of trining his,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of like the same thing with me too. Is that kind of like Murphy's law kind of aspect to his chart too? Would you say
Well, what do you mean?
kind of like I don't know. It seems like with Mercury or Jupiter and Capricorn, it's kind of like anything that can go wrong will go wrong, basically. And
Yeah, because our Jupiters are both of us have them in Capricorn.
yeah, and
And
his is in
so,
Taurus.
like, the thing about Jupiter and Capricorn or any Earth sign is that it's going to be a lot more muted in its enthusiasm. So, usually, Jupiter is the planet where you express your joy and your energy and your spirit and your adventurousness and stuff. And, like, if it's in an Earth sign, it's usually going to be a lot more sort of like low key. And in Capricorn, especially, it's almost going to be like your enthusiasm is communicated through a sort of almost a depressed and dour attitude, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
And
Mm,
people often mistake that for meaning that you have none at all, when in fact you do. It's just being expressed differently than they expected. So,
very grounded and subtle.
yeah, yeah. Very, and Murphy's Law, definitely, where you expect everything that can go wrong to go wrong. And that's part of how you try to push outward in life,
And
by being careful, by being prepared.
yeah, it's also sextile his Uranus too. So it's kind of like probably a lot of surprises that are not going to be good. Kind of like his campaign in Ukraine isn't really working out that well for him. It seems.
He seems to think it's working out, and
Do
so
you
do a
think
lot
he
of the
really believes
Russians.
that?
I think he does, and I think that even if he didn't initially, he has the idea that if he can make people believe it, it will also sort of come true for him.
Hmm. Like a
You know what I
crooked
mean?
manifestation sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah. Assume the reality and keep pushing it, and then people start to believe it, and then they make it happen. you know? So the more confident he is in the face of Zelensky pushing back, the less and less confident Zelensky tends to feel. And the more his troops and generals keep pushing. And, it's kind of like the fate accomplishes itself. That's a very INTJ thing, by the way.
Even Hitler knew when to call it quits.
It's kind of a mass manipulation tactic, you could say. So, yeah, the fact that the Jupiter's in Taurus in the seventh house, yeah, he's going to be a little bit more grounded about his personal spirit and enthusiasm, which I think is something that comes through in his interviews and stuff that you see on TV, where he seems like he's kind of like hard to get energized or excited about things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he seems like he's very sort of calm and calculated about that. And the fact that it's in the seventh house, well, usually when something's in the seventh house, it only comes to us through other people or by speaking with others, conversing with them, reflecting off of them as a sounding board. So, like, something that might be happening with him is that his development as a leader with his huge South Node complex and all this crap here is kind of suffering in its own strangling, self-isolating darkness, where he doesn't necessarily have a lot of people around him who would serve as useful friends and companions who would help lead him in a better direction. People that he would be able to get a healthier perspective on a situation from, and that makes sense because it's like, well, this Leo midheaven and Pluto and South Node thing is going to be very, very controlling and very stuck on itself. And so he doesn't want to listen to anybody else, right? But it's like, well, if you don't, you're also going to step on a landmine sooner or later. And I don't know if we can't tell what he's learned and hasn't learned. We have no idea, but maybe
it's kind of like his, it's not really aspected. I guess it's aspected to his Pluto in his South Node here, but kind of like that's what my Mars and Sagittarius and second house does to me. Kind of like that over enthusiastic morality that I have that kind of bites me in the ass.
Yeah, you get really stuck on your own conception, and it's very stubborn. Your South Node is I would say, a very stubborn combination of things, and that's part of the whole point for your North Node in your chart is to try to be more reactive, reflexive, conversational, try to think things through more, to investigate things more, to get off of your own conceptions, to get off your own value system and try to understand where other people and other things are coming from outside you.
Okay, and it is quincunx, pretty much the Neptune, it looks like, and the Sun, Saturn, Neptune, Mercury, I guess.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a loose stellium there.
Yeah.
The houses are so small, it's kind of doesn't all cram in there, I guess.
Yeah, this is in the sort of like later third of Taurus, so it would be a quincunx to things that are in the later third of Libra. So mainly it looks like we'll just say it's all of them for the hell of it. So what does that mean? What do you think it means?
We talked about how his sun or Saturn's really suppressing his sun and his self-identity. Probably feels real uncomfortable and he's trying to find it, or people's holding it back. His Mercury in Libra, so he really thinks justice oriented, right? And the Venus or the Mercury, the Neptune is real Pisces like. So what does that mean in a 12th house? It's kind of like a blind spot too, since it's in the 12th house.
Yeah, the Neptune being on top of all that stuff in the 12th house is like double blind spot. It just has a Libra personality, which is interesting because, of course, the Jupiter being in the 7th house, like that house has a Libra theme. So it's interesting that it's also quincunx all the stuff that's in Libra.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of indicates that, once again, there's a very important dimension of like social relationship that's going into this for him. To some extent, also like being able to surrender and sort of trust intuition and let go of things. Because like some of the stuff is in the 11th house, some of it's in the 12th over here, The 11th and 12th house are similar in the sense that they both involve kind of like letting stuff go to the process, whether it's the social process or the cosmic divine process. And so that Jupiter has this very strong relationship with all that stuff. And it's like it's all signaling to the Jupiter constantly that he needs to learn better how to deal with people and kind of let the larger cosmic plan unfold while also acknowledging political realities and trying to actually deal with people as tribes and organizations, which it seems like we've kind of seen that because it's like in order to be a leader like he has been in Russia, in order to even get into power at all, he kind of had to understand how the political system worked, how to engineer it, how to forecast what was going to happen, how to understand all that.
Yeah, and it's and we're talking about kind of like Libra in the 12th house and stuff. Some of it's in the 11th house, so it's kind of like friends and relationships and prosperity for all and
egalitarianism,
yeah, and
political causes, yeah.
So it kind of blends into that, and it kind of blends with being real subconscious, kind of being a blank spot, and it's all conjunct to the Jupiter, like you said. Like I'm just going to keep making it look like we're winning, so the other people, it's pretty much sound confident what you're saying, and people will believe what you're saying.
Yeah, and he might have had to learn that through a lot of really hard lessons. He's on the older end of the spectrum, so it's like the stuff that we're talking about with the nodes is stuff that he may actually have learned and integrated to some extent by now. So we just don't know exactly. He might have gotten a handle on that Jupiter to some large degree. We can't tell. But what you're talking about with the unconscious blind spot is interesting because that also has to do with how you sort of universally connect with everyone around you and sort of almost become like a spiritual or emotional conduit for all of them. So if you think about what he represents to the Russian people and how much they value and worship their strongman leaders from the past, he's kind of that incarnation of a leader, right?
Yeah.
And so in some ways, it's like he's fulfilling that role. And maybe if he's able to maintain enough of a perspective on situations from like a bird's eye view with his Jupiter, he can actually develop into someone who's able to give the political system what it truly needs to thrive and survive in his own country. Maybe not always everyone else's because he's invading them, but still.
Kind of what I see from it, like he has this egalitarian view, like how he wants to do people through like just Libra's real justice and fairness oriented.
Yeah.
But then the other side of the spectrum, it's kind of distorted and rot, and it's conjunct with Jupiter trying to be prosperous towards his everybody, and it's kind of tied as a loose, very loose conjunction with the moon here, and the moon is conjuncting all that crap over here too.
No.
So it could be some emotional turmoil, possibly. You think, or maybe in the past, like you said, I think he's in his 70s. He's a boomer since his Pluto's in Leo.
Yeah. Emotional turmoil, maybe. When the moon has a not a trine or a sextile relationship with like another water planet like Neptune, it can be pretty it can be confusing and it can be a little bit emotionally volatile, especially since a lot of it's occurring beneath the surface and the person doesn't necessarily know how to process it or even that it's there half the time. The fact that Saturn is there with Neptune so close to it is and that Saturn's on the cusp of the 12th house, that's all very like he's going to be the grand disciplinarian, but he's going to be a disciplinarian over like big overarching systems.
Yeah,
And the moon is going to sort of tie into that, and it's the disciplinarian side of himself and the emotional side of himself are going to kind of push and pull. So there's like this like parenting dynamic going on with him where he's like kind of trying to guide and protect the country at the same time that he feels that strong discipline and action are necessary.
and it's sextile with his Mars and Sagittarius in the second house, so he's probably been trying to shove his ideals down everybody's throat too.
Yeah, sort of. At least when it comes to how he wants to fight. So Mars obviously is like your basic drive to assert your existence and to fight others when you need to. And since his, like you said, it's similar to your chart. It's like his Mars is in the second house in Sagittarius. That's a very belligerent, very sort of self-important position.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And since it's in such strong agreement with the Saturn, Sun, Neptune, Mercury complex there, he's going to be really good at starting fights that are politically supported, you know,
Yeah,
and he's also going to be relatively ruthless, even if not in a blind way necessarily.
and it's all kind of connected here, and it's kind of like, well, I want you to fight for me and fight with me for my cause, and we'll all prosper together.
Yeah.
All right, we were going to talk about this too. I know you're not a big fan of Chiron, but we did have a loose conjunction down here,
Mm-hmm.
and it's Chiron's right on the Capricorn cusp, which is interesting. That goes in the third house.
The third house cusp. It's looks like it's about 5 degrees in Capricorn. Is that right? Okay, and Capricorn Chiron believes in healing of physical and mental problems through the application of rules and hard discipline, which sounds very Russian.
And it's kind of right there with his Mars, and he's kind of forcing everybody. That's
Yeah,
kind of
those being so close together, it's almost like his sense of personal belligerence and aggression goes right along with what he thinks he's doing to kind of help everybody.
and it's trine with his Leo up there. The
Yeah,
Mars
that
is at least.
it's trine with the South Node and Pluto and Midheaven with Leo.
Yeah,
Which is
yeah,
scary. That's actually really scary because that means that his really bad tendencies for power mongering and secretive operation and stuff are in total agreement with his personal aggression and belligerence that he always feels self righteously justified in doing. So that Chiron being so close to that Mars kind of means that he thinks even more that it's justified, probably because he thinks it's actually good for the world around him somehow. That it's going to heal some kind of problem somewhere for people. The Chiron's in the third house, and so it's often going to show up in how he speaks and what he thinks of as being good for communities of people and pro-social in a sense.
That sounds kind of like Hitler-esque there.
It kind of does.
What about Venus? It's kind of away from all this craziness over here in Scorpio, kind of in the middle of the first house as a part of his ascendant, which is, again, relationships and way he makes money.
A Venus Scorpio first house deal is going to be like really persuasive. He's going to be very charismatic and persuasive in a lot of ways. He may not be physically the most attractive person on the planet, but there's something about him that magnetizes people to his behavior and his cause in an immediate way where, he just has this sort of weird natural charisma and people can't explain it because it comes out in his behavior and how he presents himself.
So I think he's IST or INTJ. He doesn't sound ISTP at all. Those are the two types that were kind of thrown out there.
ISTP seems pretty unlikely.
Yeah, they're not very strategic and long form thinking, and
no.
So yeah, it does sound like he's an INTJ. If this time is accurate, we got to take that with a grain of salt.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if somebody got his birth time or somebody just kept playing around with it till they kind of matched his personality, which it seems like this does match his personality from what we know of him.
Mm-hmm.
He is super secretive. It does seem INTJ. His houses line up with mine. We got a similar Mars. My midheaven's in Cancer in the 9th house, actually, which is kind of interesting. That's something I wanted to talk to you about too. It's kind of weird how it ends up either in the 9th or 10th. It even end up in the 11th too, right? In some cases with Placidus.
What, the midheaven?
Yeah.
The midheaven is the 10th house.
Okay, because in my chart it shows up on the 9th.
Really? No. Whenever you see a midheaven MC, that's literally just the 10th house cusp. That's all it is.
I could go to my chart up there and look, I guess.
And the reason that they mark it as special is that the 10th house is like your outward facing self and how you publicly operate, and like career and crap. So it tends to be your reputation and some other stuff that like other people will know about. And so he, with the South Node and Pluto on the very cusp of the 10th house, he's going to have a reputation for being scary and secretive and ruthless and like very strategic and manipulative.
He is like the super villain of the world right now.
Yeah.
For the last, like a year and a half. He invaded February of 2002, at times just flying in not a very good way, I guess.
Yeah, right.
At least it doesn't look like it's going to escalate to World War III at this point.
No. Well, nobody wants it to.
Yeah, everybody's kind of like on their edge. It's like, how come nobody's talking about all the wars in Africa? They don't have the capacity to start World War III like Putin does.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
And Putin is, as I understand it, relatively cozy with the Chinese at this point, is he not?
It sounds that way. And they were kind of flexing their muscles, flying a bunch of jets around Taiwan, too.
Yeah.
That's scary.
If there was a China-Russia alliance, we would be in trouble.
Yeah, I think Russia's about depleted, but China's just huge. And they have Iran on their side, and Iran's not. I mean, it really just realistically takes one nuke, and we're all done.
Yeah, maybe.
Destruction.
I would hope that we would have the character and willpower not to fire back, but we'll see.
If Trump was in office, he probably would.
Maybe. Or maybe he'd just be like, well, they nuked us, but let's make a deal.
Kind of off topic, and I know you're not huge into progression, but it's kind of interesting, like these celebrities and these big name people are kind of falling, like Trump's indictment. I don't think much is going to come from it, unfortunately. But Danny Masterson was just put in prison for 30 years. He was a guy on that 70s show. That's kind of interesting. Like these rich people are kind of like getting their dues, kind of like Jeffrey Epstein. I don't know. It's like Pluto kind of changing into Aquarius kind of energy.
Yeah, you think so?
Maybe. I don't know.
A groundswell of support for supposedly pro-social and egalitarian objectives that service the needs of freedom and equality.
Yeah, it's like coming from the Capricorn and Pluto, which is like very authoritarian and dictatorial, going into like freedom fighter Aquarius.
Yeah, which could be a freedom fighter in an extremely bad way too, though, because we might start accusing people of stuff that didn't happen just because we want somebody to persecute and get the mob to go after them. I mean, it just depends.
Oh, that's kind of like the whole social justice movement and stuff.
Yeah.
That kind of seems like that makes a lot of sense. That's been going on for a while though, but I guess, it's like Pluto's like the Titanic way out there, doesn't turn on a dime.
Yeah.
All
Yep,
right.
and
I
each
don't
sign leading into the next one, they always share themes being next to each other. So, like Capricorn and Aquarius share themes of trying to sort of engineer the social world in some way or another, you know?
So Mercury's in Scorpio, so he's very scorpionic there, and it's right on the ascendant too. Looks like. Oh no,
Yeah.
I guess yeah,
Is that the
that's Mercury
ascendant? That's the ascendant, isn't it?
right
Mercury's in
here.
Libra. Yeah, I think that because Mercury should be this line. This should be this one. This should be this one. This should be this one. See that? And then the ascendant should
Oh,
be this one, and then this should be.
oh, okay.
I think so. Yeah. It marks the ascendant as its own thing, which is just the first house, which is kind of silly, but okay.
What is Mercury in Libra? It's really like you communicate and think in a very justice-oriented way, fair way, but again, it's real distorted because it's in the 12th house and that stellium with all this stuff aspecting it.
Um, yeah. So when we have lots of air stuff kind of together, like if we have an air planet and an air sign, and Mercury is an air planet, even though it's also an Earth one, um, but it's also an Earth planet that's very focused on logic. So Mercury is usually the planet of logic and thought. That's the Gemini and Virgo side of that. So if it's in Libra, I know people usually think of Libra as the dumb blonde in the room when it comes to the signs and stuff. Like it's like the bimbo sign, but like,
Really?
well, they tend to just because it's like, oh, it's about relationships. It's like, well, don't forget that air signs had to do with like abstract thought and higher thought processes and language and stuff. And there are a lot of famous scientists that used Libra to determine how the universe works by using relational models in their thoughts. So, like Libra Mercury could be really, really good at mentally analyzing what's going on around it, but it uses a sort of like comparative mode of thought where it's always weighing and balancing things against each other. The fact that it's in the 12th house means that this comes out in really strange and unexpected ways, though. Um, so he's not going to be as directly communicative about his thoughts and his various mental musings about how to strategize around things. It's going to be very internalized. He may not always even be aware of it himself.
Yeah, kind of a side note here. I was talking to somebody on my Discord server. I don't really want to name names. He's been real uppity and up on his toes lately. We're talking about Aquarius being fairly like an INTJ type energy. He thinks it's more like ENFJ, ENTJ. What are your thoughts on that? I think we discussed that before.
Aquarius? Oh, no, man. I have always associated Aquarius with things like INTJs. There's other personalities that you could associate with that, like ESFJ and stuff, because it's like a big, like, group collaborative thing.
But it's
But
kind of like a group thing. Like I'll stay over here, you guys are over here, sort of thing. No, right?
But once again, when we're comparing MBTI to like a whole natal chart with all the different planets and signs involved, it has to do with an alchemical combination of all these different things going into the same cauldron and spitting out a result, which is you. And so it's like, well, if we're talking about an ESFJ Aquarius energy, we're talking more about the sort of directly social, like I'm going to go have fun with the group and like try to get them what they need sort of deal. Whereas with an INTJ Aquarius energy, is going to be much more like, how can I advance the cause of humanity by figuring out how to direct people in the right way, even if I have to sacrifice myself and my ego? And then they're going to land in these exact places and invent these things, and then society is going to like evolve forward, and it's going to be like part of a cosmic plan that I have pegged out for the next 10,000 years, like it's that kind of stuff.
I was reading a book with Aquarius in it, and it kind of did say like Aquarians can be aloof, but then it said a lot of group think, a lot of group collaboration stuff at the same time.
Well, yeah, and I saw a recent quote. I don't remember who it was from. It was interesting, though. It was on some YouTube video I was watching, and they're talking. It was like a guy who was an artist, and he was talking about why he thought it was okay to not have a job. And the reason that he thought it was okay to not have a job is that he felt that people were more able to be in sort of these like fringe groups in society that were free thinking. And he was asserting that no artist or brilliant like scientist who ever made any great art or discoveries ever did so in a vacuum. And so, like, if we don't have people at the fringe of society who are outside groups and normal jobs and roles, they can't be in these groups where they're in part of this, like, sort of scene that's going against the common mode of thought in the culture. And since they can't be in that scene, they can't have all these people around them that kind of brainstorm stuff together and come up with all this crazy crap. And so he's like saying all the biggest artistic and scientific achievements in human history were not just a single person, they were just the spokesperson. But really there was like this big community behind them, and it took all those people with all their ideas and communication together to kind of come up with this new thing, right? So
There's this quote, I'm definitely going to paraphrase it and butcher it. It said, forgot who said it too. It's along the lines of, the only time there was change in the world is through a small group of people and nothing else, or something like that.
yeah.
Kind of like Elon Musk gets a lot of crap because he tries to say he invented all this stuff, but in reality he has a group of engineers and stuff, and people say like he just blurts out pretty much everything, and his engineers say, well, this is plausible and this isn't plausible, we're going to work on this, I guess.
Yeah, and so like something that you see with INTJ, with Aquarius, is that they really like sort of being the, I don't even how I want to say this, almost like an invisible presence amongst all these other people around them that helps facilitate the recombining of ideas. You know, the sort of mental and intellectual collaboration that gives rise to new visions and concepts. So they are collaborative in a sense, but they tend to remove themselves from the picture a lot, which fits with the Aquarian model because being the opposite of Leo, it very much takes its ego out of the equation. In fact, a lot of Aquarian types would be happy if they could just sit on the outside and try to help facilitate the group towards something that the group is doing as a whole, rather than being the one at the center getting the credit and getting recognized.
Yeah. It's kind of what I was saying. You're kind of on the group, but the group's over there and you're over here, sort of thing.
Yeah. So I wouldn't call it exactly an ENTJ thing, actually.
Yeah.
ENTJs are much more sort of like direct ego, direct action, whatever.
They're more like the Capricorn in a lot of ways.
Yeah, almost all my stuff is in Scorpio, Sagittarius, and Capricorn. So
I was gonna say Sagittarius and Capricorn. Definitely, like we're looking at NTs, and I don't know if it's, we're looking at mostly like neurodivergent autistic NTs, and they seem to have a lot of Scorpio. I like to
Yeah.
find more of a neurotypical NT, if that's even a thing. Look at her chart, their charts. But I think that's about all the questions I have for Putin. Do you have anything else you'd like to add? Where we're pretty much just talking about like the little devil picture here is like the trident of Neptune, Aquarius, and all this Pluto underworld leader stuff. Kind of interesting archetypal blend there.
And then I said, yeah, I was saying that like even if he is developing his North Node, he might still be evil. Like someone's inner development's not the same as their morality, so it's like he might be developing the Aquarius third house North Node here, but that doesn't mean he isn't still evil. So who knows?
Yeah, there's a lot of gray areas there. Someone who might view him as evil might not view him as evil, like Russians or Chinese or whatever. Because in a sense, U.S. are pretty evil. We're trying to like the Hulk Hogan of the world, basically, but underneath we're narcissistic assholes.
Yeah, we can't go too easy on ourselves.
All right. Well, everybody, thank you for watching. If you made it this far, sorry for the long hiatus. I think this is a fun, interesting project we have going on. If you like it, share it, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Thank you for watching.